all we've talked about in effective altruism has been pretty abstract and pretty theoretical. I want to make it more concrete with some really effective altruism style decisions that some charities that we know or have incubated made compared to kind of what the traditional charity would do in the same circumstance. This can really give you a concrete sense of how applying effective altruism concepts can lead to pretty substantial changes in the way your charity takes actions. So the first one is a version of impartiality. So a type of impartiality we didn't talk about was impartiality of who's doing the good. This is the idea that if I go out and help someone versus if you go out and help someone, that doesn't really make a difference as long as the person is helped. This is a pretty basic concept, but a lot of organizations don't function this way. They very much think about what will be best for their organization, will grow them the most or make them succeed, instead of maybe what's best for the world or what's best given other actors in the space. This is a really different mindset. One of our alumni charities last year got a job applicant who was quite a strong applicant for our job. But they also knew one of our other organizations, one of the other ones that went through the program at the same time as them, was hiring. And this candidate looked like an even better fit for that job. They told the candidate about the other job offer so they could consider it and think about which one they were a better fit for. And eventually they did go with the second organization. They basically got a referral to a job that they got. Now, from just the first organization's perspective, this is a bad move. Telling one of your stronger candidates about another job offer that's open, that's just a recipe for competition. However, for the world, it could be the fact that it's much better for this person to get a job that's a really good fit for them, to get a job at the organization that's going to best utilize their talents and skills. This sort of level of cooperation is pretty uncommon in the charity world, and even somewhat uncommon in the effective altruism world. But once you really start to internalize impartiality, you get a lot more comfortable with this. This is part of the reason why we set up charity entrepreneurship, in fact. It doesn't really matter if we start a fantastic charity and get big and get recognized and help a lot of people, or if someone who goes through our program does. As long as good happens and impact is achieved, that's really what matters. So this is a rather extreme version of impartiality, but it can be a really different way of thinking. It's not about what organization gets the credit or what organization gets to do the good deed at the end of the day. It's about how many people total get helped. That can often lead your organization to prioritizing other organizations or the movement as a whole or this sort of thing in ways that would be pretty atraditional. Another fairly extreme example of this, transparency about failures. From an internal organization perspective, generally it's better to hide your failures, to kind of shove them under the rug. However, what if those failures are a sort of failure that's very common, that many other organizations could make, maybe even that many other organizations in your movement are considering? Then it's a lot better to be transparent about that failure. And your organization in most cases won't benefit from being transparent about its weaknesses, but the community and the world as a whole will benefit greatly. Again, this is about impartiality of who's doing the good. It might harm your organization, but it might help the world anyways. Another example is the idea of cause X. So when charity entrepreneurship is evaluating what cause areas to work on in a given year, we take a lot of things into account. But one of the things we take into account is what areas the EA movement is excited about and we get lots of applicants for. And from our personal success perspective, charity entrepreneurship probably looks best if we pick areas very similar to the areas that EAs are generally aligned with. There's a lot of guaranteed funding there for us. There's a lot of guaranteed interest there for us. However, when we look at the Cause X framework, the idea and the value of potentially finding a new cause area that could become very popular in a movement like the effective altruism movement, that leads us to try out some more experimental causes, to go with cause areas that maybe aren't established as really promising in the EA movement, but we think has a very good case to be very promising, to be one of the top areas. Mental health is a good example of this. One of our last year's students, Michael Plant, spent a long time advocating to the effective altruism movement that mental health was very promising and it looked very impactful from a lot of different perspectives that were quite defendable. And some of the people he convinced included us. We were fairly compelled that mental health was a very promising area and was neglected by the effective altruism community as a whole. Now, most communities coming to a very different idea like this, thinking that mental health could be very promising, wouldn't be acceptable, wouldn't be seen as positive in the community. However, in the EA community, this thing is seen as quite positive. Someone exploring a cause area that has a really strong case for impact, but needs to be fleshed out a little bit more. One of the things that will really strengthen the case for mental health as an EA area is a strong charity being started in. The same is true of family planning. Both of these have some interest, but without a concrete, obvious EA charity to support, it's hard for some of these cause areas to get traction. Again, this is an example of maybe us not doing the best thing for for charity entrepreneurship's growth, but maybe doing the best thing for the world, taking into account the broader movement level effects, taking into account that we might not have the right answer right now. There might be some other mystery cause out there that's more impactful than anything any of us are considering. Another application of an EA concept is we're going to talk about value drift. Now, value drift is, as we mentioned before, when you drift away from doing altruistic activities, but there are a lot of ways to mitigate or prevent this. So one is when considering city choice or location selection, one thing you might want to consider is where can you surround yourself with a community of people who will support what you're doing. This could be a community of charity entrepreneurs, it could be a community of effective altruists, it could be any sort of other community that's going to provide encouragement to your altruistic drive instead of discouragement. This sort of choice can really make a big difference for your organization and where it goes over time. You'll have to think about this double when you think about hiring someone who's actually going to create the establish of your culture. Someone might be very talented, but do they bring a positive value attribution to your organization, or do you think that organizationally they'll make you drift a little bit? Committing publicly to altruism is another good example of applying a concern of value drift. Maybe I'm worried that future Joey won't be as altruistic as I currently am. If I make a public pledge or declaration of how altruistic I'm going to be, a lot of people in the EA movement have taken the 10% Giving What We Can pledge, for example. This can help ensure that I'm making altruism a more permanent part of my life, a more significant part of my being. Even identifying as an altruist or an effective altruist can make you more altruistic in the long term because it becomes more of an immersed part of your self-identity.